you tell me a little bit about Harvey?
Yes, so Harvey is a 2-year-old little boy. Sorry, I might need a moment just thinking about everything, but so he was born in March 2020 at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic. Actually 3 days before the first lockdown. We were living in Seattle at the time. And we just thought we had a healthy little boy, and we were really lucky, and came home from the hospital really quickly because they didn't want people in the hospital obviously longer than needed. And you know, I had girlfriends who were pregnant, and I was just so relieved, like I had a healthy little boy and I didn't have to live through that stress that they were living through. But by about, you know, even earlier, there were little signs that we didn't think much of. We didn't know to think of. Like, he's always had some mild eye crossing or strabismus that got progressively worse as he got around 7-8 months old. There were things like he didn't use his right arm really. Like, if we had him in a little play seat, he would just whack things really with his left arm, and that's continued. And he wasn't really starting to hit those milestones that you would expect to see. So he would scream during tummy time and wasn't rolled, and then kind of lost that skill. He regressed for quite a few months. And so by about 8 months, I was, hey, babe, you want to come sit in Mama's lap? Pretty concerned. You know, you don't go for another well check until 9 months. So I called his pediatrician's office to see if we could get him into some PT, because I thought, well, maybe I'm just not targeting the skills enough. But it was odd after having a typically developing child. And they immediately were very concerned about where his skills had not been developing since his last appointment. So they sent us over to Seattle Neurology at that point in time, and they usually takes about a year to get in, and they're like, no, given the severity of your case, we're going to expedite you and you come in right away. And this was right before Christmas in December of 2020. Hey, bud. And they initially thought that maybe he had some form of cerebral palsy, and so they send you on kind of your traditional pathway of doing different testing modalities that I think a lot of families have to go through, unfortunately, which, you know, there's a lot of talk about legislation to change that pathway so that you can get to diagnosis a lot faster. But they do typically a standard brain MRI and a bunch of blood work to see if there's something going on that they can treat or see on the MRI. And there was nothing super significant. Oh, you want to go in the playroom for a little bit? Okay.
You can go.
You know, and his brain MRI just showed delayed myelination, which is actually shows up for a lot of kiddos with his syndrome. So we thought, you know, okay, great, things are not maybe as concerning as we initially had thought. But we shortly after that moved to Austin because Adam had taken a job here back in Austin, and immediately were able to get back into Dell Children's through a friend who helped us navigate that system, who works for UT Neuroscience. And they immediately said, we need to, you know, continue testing. We have a lot of concerns here about his progression of milestones, low tone, other things that are really common across a lot of spectrum of disorders. And we started the first set of genetic testing with Harvey at that point in time. And that was in January of 2021, and we didn't receive a diagnosis of Harvey's ultra-rare genetic disorder until August of 2021. So from 6 months, we started having concerns. It took us until he was almost 18 months old to actually get a diagnosis. Partly just because labs are super backed up, but also just there's kind of this bureaucracy of like, we're not gonna do all this testing up front for you. Or, you know, you have to go through these steps and rule outs before we'll offer a full genetic sequencing or exome sequencing for your child. And actually I've heard that in the UK, they're starting to talk about offering that to families as a general newborn screening for all families, like offering full exome sequencing testing, because we're missing so many of these genetic disorders. They're very underdiagnosed because this testing was really inaccessible even just a couple years ago in terms of the creation of the testing, the cost of the testing. But it means that so many kids are missed, and the opportunity to treat is best as soon as possible. And with Harvey's genetic disorder, so there are estimated to be around 7,000 rare diseases, and 80% are considered to be genetic in nature, so quite a few. And that's just what we know right now today. I'm sure that number is going to continue to grow, especially with this exome sequencing, which basically means they sequence all of his DNA against my husband's and mine to look for mutations. And Harvey is believed to have what we would consider like a random mutation on the DLG4 gene. So not something that's inherited from Adam or I, but would have possibly been there before even conception. And you know, we don't really know the cause of why a child would have a mutation like that, but it seems like across a lot of these ultra rare genetic disorders, the majority of them are considered de novo or random mutations that happen within the child. They're not often inherited. And right now, less than 6% of genetic disorders actually have a treatment available for them. So Harvey's genetic disorder was not even characterized. It was just a variant of concern. So something they had seen across some patients over time until April of 2021 was the first paper. So even if we had had that testing, offered test, we maybe would have had a variant of concern. But it goes to show how much more testing we need to do of children, because we're probably missing a lot of these kids. And Harvey's genetic disorder is highly correlated with epilepsy and autism. So I think we're learning more and more over time that we haven't been able to necessarily pinpoint what's autism. And I think that we're actually starting to see with this exome sequencing that a lot of these kids have a variety of different ultra-rare genetic disorders that present with a lot of the same kinds of characteristics. So low tone, sometimes strabismus or CVI, which is cortical visual impairment. So they have odd eye mannerisms. They typically have severe or at least moderate cognitive impairments, a lot of sensory issues, repetitive behaviors. I don't know if you've seen Harvey doing some of his hand mannerisms, rocking, things like that, which, you know, impaired eye contact, therefore less interaction. And quite a few of the children with his disorder, DLG4, synaptopathy, never develop verbal communication either. And so if you look at an autism spectrum disorder and the criteria, Harvey also has been diagnosed with that by his neurologist who specializes in autism. But I think she's on the same path of thinking that a lot of people are now at this point, that is it really these ultra rare genetic disorders that we're now finally starting to pinpoint what is causing severe autism, and there are potential treatment modalities for these kids. And that's really why we're willing to sit here today, because we hope that we can find a treatment for our son and for other children with DLG4. And I believe that because of its correlation with epilepsy and with autism, and you know, the more and more they learn about these disorders,
Harvey gets fussy,
like
take
there's
him some
other
water, okay?
synaptopathies, so other genetic disorders that impact the synapses in the brain, that these treatments really can be tweaked and modified potentially at some point in time to really cross a lot of boundaries and help a lot of children. And I really do believe that, because we've just seen an explosion in the science over the last couple of years especially, and I think that in 5 or 10 years we're going to find out how to do these individualized medicines or programmable medicines that target your genes or your messenger RNA is another option, so you don't actually have to edit or modify the gene itself, but the copy it makes that then tells your cells what to do in your body. And there's also plenty of possibilities of finding like a small molecule drug that's already been out there and created, that a side effect of it might be to help the protein that Harvey's deficit in because of his mutation, which is PSD95.